Welcome to Motor's Methods. Today we're going to discuss fascial gliding and its influence on muscle spindle fibers. As fascial therapists, we examine the ability of muscles to glide over each other and over fascial planes. This plays a strong influence in areas such as the low back, where we have multiple muscles pulling in different directions, which can influence the joints they surround. As an example, if we look at the low back, we have the pull of the latissimus dorsi, the pull of the lumbar erectors, and the pull of the hamstring, as well as the pull of the tensor fasciae lata, all influencing the sacroiliac joint. Now, this system works quite well as long as the muscles pull in a balanced fashion and we have normal distribution of forces onto the joint. However, if we have aberrations in muscle pull due to differences in fascial gliding or due to tone changes within the muscles themselves, then we can begin to get aberrations in the fascial pull, which can lead to excess stress onto a joint, which eventually leads to joint inflammation and joint irritation. So, what influences the ability of muscles and fascia to glide and to correctly have a normal stress onto the muscle spindle fibers? Well, there's been extensive work done by the Stecos, Antonio and Carla, and they're examining specifically hyaluron or hyaluronic acid and its distribution throughout the fascial layers and its distribution throughout the muscles layers. Hyaluron is a glycosamine glycan that's a rather large molecule, as shown over here. And glycosamine glycans function specifically to provide sliding and lubrication within the joints, as well as within the fascia and soft tissues. The key glycosamine glycans that the Stecos have examined is hyaluronate, which is the large backbone of these large glycosamine glycans. To hyaluronate, we have other glycosamine glycans such as chondroitin sulfate, keratin sulfate, that connect to it through link proteins. However, it's the hyaluronate that is the backbone of this glycosamine glycans. With all of these connections of the other glycosamine glycans on them, this molecule becomes very, very hydrophilic. So it really wants to draw in water. In fact, most glycosamine glycans can hold up to 80 times their weight in water. So this is what gives us the fluid viscosity of hyaluron between these fascial layers and allows this free sliding of the muscles between the deep fascia and the muscles between themselves, specifically the muscle fibers to slide as they move across different planes. So what does all this have to do with the muscle spindle? Well, let's take a look at that. When we look at the muscle spindle, it lies actually within the perimysium of the muscle. Okay? Now, what surrounds each muscle fiber is the epimysium. Then what surrounds bundles of fibers is the perimysium, and that's actually where the muscle spindles live. Okay? So the capsule of the muscle spindle actually is continuous with the perimysium. And if we remember from our previous slide, there's hyaluron surrounding these areas to allow sliding between these fibers and fibrils, as well as between the fascia. So this ability to slide and to sense motion is extremely important because muscle spindle fibers react mainly to stretch. So the ability of the muscle spindle to detect stretch and to detect forces placed upon it is very dependent on the environment it's living in. So if it's a very fluid and dynamic environment, the muscle spindle can easily pick up sensations of stretch or sensation of load, which will cause the muscle spindle to fire. Let's take a quick look at the muscle spindle itself. The muscle spindles are known as interfusal fibers because they lay within the extrafusal fibers of the muscle. So here's the extrafusal fiber, and then within there is the muscle spindle and its capsule. Now realize that this capsule is continuous with the paramecium. So it's greatly influenced by the amount of hyaline that's available in that area and allows this muscle spindle to be very reactive to stress. So what happens when the muscle spindle is put under stretch or under stress? Well, mechanically gated ion channels actually open from the stretch and allow inflow of ions, which activates the afferents heading back to the spinal cord. As the afferent goes up, goes into the spinal cord and causes an alpha motor neuron to fire the extrafusal fibers, causing the muscle to contract. At the same time, we have coactivation of gamma fibers. We'll talk about the gamma fiber influence in just a second. But the key to remember is for the muscle spindle to operate, it needs to stretch to open up these mechanically gated ion channels. And these are mechanically gated, so they have to open due to stretch. Now, if I place the muscle spindle into an environment, or if I change the viscosity of the environment around it, in other words, let's take away some of the water from around the hyaline. What would happen to the hyaline? Well, its viscosity would rise. And one of the issues that causes the viscosity, or for water to go away from the hyaluronic acid, is an acidic environment. So if we introduce our friend lactate into the system, and lactate's a byproduct of muscle spindle, the ATP conversion of muscle spindle. Lactate's a byproduct of that. And we've all heard of lactic acid causing cramping. But one of the culprits in acidification of this environment is lactate, which would cause the hyaline to lose water and actually cause the viscosity to go up. So this area becomes more viscous. So what happens as this area becomes more viscous? Well, the pull, because the area is becoming more viscous, the pull on the muscle spindle may be lessened. And if the pull is lessened, then the muscle spindle may not fire when it should, which will start to cause some muscle dysfunction. So this is one of the ways that changes into the fascial system can actually lead to muscle dysfunction, because it's starting to mask the normal stretch that these muscle fibers should be experiencing. Let's talk briefly about the influence of gamma as well, because as I said, when the afferent fibers, it goes up and causes the alpha motor neuron to fire, causing firing in the extrafusal fibers, or a contraction of the muscle. It also goes through an inhibitory neuron to cause reciprocal inhibition of the antagonist to that muscle, and it coactivates gamma fibers. Now, gamma fibers directly innervate the interfusal fibers. As I said, alpha motor neurons come back to the extrafusal fibers, but gamma motor neurons come back to the interfusal fibers. And what the gamma fibers are responsible for is contraction of the interfusal fibers. And they keep the interfusal fiber taut as the muscle shortens. Okay? So as the muscle shortens, these interfusal fiber needs to stay taut to keep the muscle contracting. If it didn't. What would happen is, as the muscle shortened, the gamma, and the gamma did not fire, the muscle spindle will become slack. And if the muscle spindle became slack, the mechanically gated ion channels close, and the muscle spindle basically stops contracting the muscle. So gamma coactivation is very important in keeping a fluid, equal muscle strength the whole way through. The other consideration with gamma that you need to keep in mind is, if I send down a gamma signal without muscle contraction, in other words, I shorten the spindle without shortening the muscle, what happens to the muscle? Well, that would increase tone. So much of our resting tone is responsible from the gamma motor neurons coming down. So again, the question would arise, because muscle spindles provide much of our map backwards. We map our entire sensory system through our brain, and the gamma feedback is very important in mapping our sensation or our proprioceptive system as it's through the central nervous system. And again, the question would arise, if I change the environment that the spindle is living in by altering the viscosity of hyaron, will I start to change the map? So when we start to look at dysfunctional motor patterns or dysfunctional movement patterns, one of the culprits may prove to be this change in viscosity of hyaluronic acid. So again, going back to our low back model, if I have an overuse of the erector spinae, which is fairly common, this is a hypertonic muscle if we look at some of Yonda's work. This is a hypertonic muscle. We look at the glute med, which traditionally is a hypotonic muscle, begins to shut down. Hamstring, which is a hypertonic muscle, so we start to increase the pull of these muscles. They become overworked. This muscle lessens the pull, so now we start to have an aberration of pull onto the SI joint. So the question arises, how much of changes to the environment within these muscles, specifically changes to the hyaluronic acid due to acidification from lactate, how much does that influence the dysfunction of the muscle and the dysfunction of typically like the global firing pattern of that muscle, of the entire muscle complexes together, and how much does that influence the joint? The other question that arises is, when we do fascial work, what really are we trying to do? You know, we've all felt, as we do our fascial work, we felt areas of grittiness or areas of that seem to, for lack of better terms, melt as we continue to work on that tissue. Now, the old theories were that was areas of fibrosis or areas of changes to the dense connective tissue. But if it was truly fibrosis, which again is a change to the dense connective tissue, would that actually melt under as we're working in that short period of time? The answer is probably not. So what are we feeling when stuff begins to, for lack of better terms, break up under our influence of myofascial therapy? Probably what we're definitely trying to change is the densification that has occurred. And this is a term that's been coined by Stecco again. So if we look at the densification that's occurred, in other words, the change to the loose connective tissue, where the hyaluron lays, not the dense connective tissue, not changes to the collagen or elastin, but changes to the loose connective tissue where the hyaluronic acid lays, that's probably what we're influencing with most of our myofascial therapy. So again, if you're interested in learning more about this, I highly recommend this book by Carla Stecco on Functional Atlas of the Human Fascial System. It's very good on going over much more of these types of concepts. Also, we welcome you to take a look on our website, modustherapeuticmethods.com. We have a lot of current research articles posted and exploring various ways that we can examine what the next step in fascial therapy would be. Thanks for taking some time to look at our video, and we hope to talk to you soon.